Good afternoon, everyone. It's been a big week. The boys are back. We've got a special guest on today, Mike. Who do we have? What are we talking about today?
So today we have Michael Branagan joining us, and he is from South Coast Polished Concrete. We're actually going to be talking about some machinery today. We're going to a little bit of a different change of machinery that we tend to talk about. We're going to be talking about some smaller machinery and some smaller machinery with some big upgrades. So yeah, it's going to be a good, interesting chat. Nice to have you, Michael. Thanks for coming along.
Thanks for having me.
What?
Michael, give us a shameless plug. Where is South Coast? Somewhere in Tasmania?
No, somewhere much nicer than that. In sunny Merimbula. So on the very far south coast of New South Wales. It's about an hour over the big border right on the coast. So about roughly 7 hours to Melbourne, 7 hours to Sydney, right in the middle of nowhere, just how I like it.
About as far as you can get from both Melbourne and Sydney with still being on the East Coast. That's good.
Exactly.
Good.
Yeah.
Good play.
Yeah. Perfect spot.
Beautiful spot. I've stayed at the caravan park on top of the hill there a couple of times and been to the nice fish restaurant opposite the golf course there and what have you. So great spot.
Yeah, it's a good spot of the world.
So, Michael, you've got an interesting story. You're based in somewhere central to Melbourne and Sydney, and you venture neither to either. And you've got a good little operation running out of Merimbula. But there's something that's different about the concept of how you're going to market in Merimbula compared to the rest of the country, I guess, who are doing similar things to what you're doing in grinding and polishing. What's the major thing that everybody knows that's different about Michael Branagan in this industry?
In the industry, I do it very differently. I've always focused on the small, lightweight machines. Yeah, it's backwards for most people, and I completely understand why. There was a reason for it in the beginning, but it's just kind of stuck, and I've made it work. So yeah.
Where did we start?
Where did it start? So originally, I actually worked selling flooring accessories to the resilient flooring trade. And eventually, and I did that for many years, eventually we started getting into concrete grinders and selling those mainly for crack grinding and things like that. And I had one of the American sales reps come out from that company and do a demonstration on our factory floor to show us what polished concrete was. And as Americans do, it was a really light exposure, somewhere between salt and pepper, light random sort of thing. The floor wasn't grouted. He only used lithium, polished it up. Nowadays, I'd probably look at it and go, geez, that's pretty ordinary. But at the time, I thought, this is amazing. That was the most incredible floor finish I've ever seen. It felt so awesome and refined, and it was cool to think you could do that just with concrete. So I then wanted to learn everything there was about it, and so I got a hand grinder and some concrete pavers from Bunnings and started playing around with at home and taught myself how to do it, as well as a lot of Google research and asking anyone I could and that sort of thing. Eventually from there, I upgraded and bought myself a cub grinder. So that was a big upgrade from a hand grinder to a cub grinder, and I actually tinkered with mechanically polished concrete with a cub grinder.
Wow.
Polished my own veranda at home like that, and I remember once actually going in and speaking to Tim in at the shop there and about doing mechanically polished concrete with a cub grinder, and he said, "You mean a grind and seal?" And I said, no, it was actually mechanically polished. And from there, it started off as a sideline business. I needed to make more money outside of my normal job. My wages wasn't enough. We just had a firstborn son, and I didn't want to see him going off to childcare and things. So I thought I need to make more money after hours. So I started a business called After Hours Concrete Grinding. And of course, that's what I did. The name said it all. After hours on weekends and things, I just picked out the small jobs that were not treading on the toes of my current customers, little glue removal jobs that were, painful for someone who specialised in concrete grinding to go and do a 20 square metre glue removal job or something like that. It was good little crane jobs that I could do. So it sort of started off in that way. Eventually I realised a cub grinder wasn't really ticking all the boxes that I needed. So I decided for another big upgrade, and my budget was only very small at the time. So a $7,000 PG 450 fitted the bill perfectly. And I jumped in and grabbed one of those, and Then I convinced my wife I had a brilliant idea. Let's sell our dream house. Let's quit our well-paying jobs. We'll move into state with our 6-month-old son, and I'll start a business mechanically polishing concrete with a PG 450. So that's what we did.
And
somehow we agreed that was a good idea.
And how long ago was that, Michael? What sort of period of time are we talking? Is this sort of 10 years ago, 15, 20 years ago?
9 years ago we moved up here. So prior to that, I had been tinkering around and doing the sideline business and stuff for a few years prior to that, and starting to learn about polished concrete prior to that. But yeah, it was about 9 years ago we moved up here and made that jump. And at first, it was still fitted the bill to keep that single-phased machinery, because most of the work, when I first came here, Marimbila's only got a permanent population of about 5,000 people, and there hadn't really been anyone here focused on advertising as being in the area, local, doing this full-time. So when I first got here, business was quiet. Majority of jobs were little reno jobs, the old slabs, shed conversions, garage conversions, 30 square metres, maybe up to 50 square metres was a reasonable sized job for me. Often a lot of stuff smaller than that, bit of prep grinds. So single phase machinery fitted the budget, fitted the bill, fitted the time frames. I had plenty of time, so I didn't need to get a job done faster. And so the fact that we had made such a commitment with selling the house and quitting our jobs and everything else, I also needed to make it work. So everyone had all told me that you can't do this, you're mad. And I sort of went, I will do this, it has to happen, I have no other option. So there it was, very determined and very steep learning curve, yeah.
And that brings us to the PG 450. So what's happened sort of since that period of time with the PG 450 to where you are now machinery-wise?
Many things since then. The first PG 450 started suffering belt slip, which seems to be an extremely common fault with them. Great machine otherwise, they get the power down pretty well, no real adjustment, speed, direction, anything else, but when you could get them using different systems to actually start to grind productively, then they actually worked all right until the belt started slipping, and then they're useless. So I bought another PG 450 while I tried to figure out what was wrong with the first one and how to fix it. That eventually suffered the same fate, and it was about that time that HTC brought out the T5. And when I first saw that advertised, I went, that looks like an awesome machine, so much more adaptable, variable speed, variable direction, water mister, which was meant to be like, amazing. That's incredible. Adjustable weights and all those sorts of things. That was a bit of a disappointment though, the single phase T5. I could run full sets of diamonds. I could run half sets of diamonds. The PG 450 could only run half sets, so I was used to doing that. So that was how I first started with the T5 and playing around with what worked. When I ran a half set of diamonds, it was more productive at doing the first cut. When I put on a full set of diamonds, I lost production because I just decreased point load and stuff. But if I put the weights forwards, I didn't have the power to drive the thing. And so it was still torque up because the diamonds were biting. I had more diamonds in contact, but I now didn't have the power to drive those diamonds. So, and not realising the implications at the time of only running half sets of diamonds, I continued on basically because of production, running half sets of diamonds. That creates another issue in itself when you're trying to mechanically polish concrete, especially with a grinder that doesn't have weight and power to flatten the floor out well in the first place. So I was disappointed with that. I ended up going for a Chinese machine, which I found one that had a 3 kilowatt motor. So I then upgraded, bought one of those and thought I'd give this a crack and see what it can do. It seemed to get the power down better, was gear driven, but I then discovered things like rotation ratio, I like to call it. So the amount of times with these single drive machines, the amount of rotations of a satellite to a planetary, and the implications of what that did on the floor. So the thing could get the power down quite well. You could load it up with weights and things, but now the scratch pattern was ordinary. Trying to get into adhesive, as an example, the scratch pattern is now like this, where the diamonds shoot out from the centre to the outside edge, do a really sharp U-turn and come back in. You're never creating this circular scratch or edge. So the first time I hit carpet glue with that thing, I spent about 10 minutes trying to get it to remove 2 square metres of carpet adhesive from a front door, and realised that it was awful and it was only smearing stuff everywhere. It never actually cut in at all. And I ended up getting out my 5-inch hand grinder and ripping it off in about 30 seconds flat, and then carried on with the rest of the job. So I didn't realise that thing was useless because it only did 2.5 rotations of the satellite to one full rotation of the planetary. So then learnt about how important the rotation ratio was. The 450 was 10 rotations of the satellite to one rotation of the planetary. The T5 was 12 rotations. So it all started to come into play. And it was about this time that I came and did my first Works Plus seminar. One of the things that amazed me the most was, apart from you guys talking about how flat a floor needed to be, and me looking at that thinking if I had floors this flat to begin with, I'd be in heaven. You guys had an issue with the flatness of the demo floor we were working on with an 820, and Josh kindly volunteered me to get on the 820 straight up, going from a 110 odd kilo machine to a 500 kilo machine. I grabbed hold of it with white knuckles and was waiting for someone to turn it on and thought I was going to get thrown against the wall. And I couldn't believe, for such a large, powerful machine and how much stock it could remove or whatever, how refined the scratch pattern was compared to mine. So when I finally got these single-phase grinders working with soft bond diamonds, half sets of diamonds, all that sort of stuff, the scratch pattern was awful on the floor in comparison to how refined this monster of a machine was. And also same direction rotation. The biggest thing that I picked up from the seminar was running full sets of diamonds. Again, what an impact that made on the floor and flatness. And when I saw the scratch pattern of an 820, and Kurt was actually at that seminar, and he was talking about we're going to have to tidy up this floor after grouting it to be able to transition it the next day. Again, I looked at the scratch pattern from 120s and thought I'd have no issues transitioning that with my 450s, because the scratch pattern I'd always had was a lot coarser than what you guys had there. When I left the seminar on my drive back from Melbourne back to Merimbula, I jumped on the phone to Husky and said, have you guys got a 530 there? And they did, and I got a good deal, and I bought it straight away because I then saw the importance of so many other things. So I went to a 530. That was a stock 3-phase. It always used to overload when I get it going productive. I then had remembered back at the seminar talking to Josh about big blocking a 530, and I went, that's my next move. This thing's awesome. Got that done. It's been a brilliant machine ever since. I did, for some of the harder access jobs, getting upstairs and things like that, bought a 3-phase 540, which is a 4 kilowatt little machine. That compared to a 530 is very much a small 3-phase machine. The 530 was more of like a small, big machine, I guess. That's sort of how I used to describe it to people. If you stood behind one and used them, you felt the difference. The floor showed you the difference. The 530 was much more of a big, small machine than the 540, which was just a toy. The 540 was also counter rotary, it wasn't same direction rotation, so it was nowhere near as aggressive or as effective or anything else. Still did a great job for a little machine to get upstairs and that, but didn't excite me a great deal, even being a 3-phase. I bought a PG 680, I bought an RX6. I then decided that remote control might be the way to go, and I hated that. And I didn't hate it because it was a 4-head machine, like everyone said that I would. I hated it because it had so much chassis weight, and I was used to a light chassis where if my handle's rubbing on a wall, I can just grab the chassis and move it across and keep grinding. That thing had about 220 kilos of chassis weight and about 210 kilos of head weight when the weights were down. So you couldn't just shuffle the handle over, and it always wanted to bump into a wall, and my slabs were never flat enough to just run a 4-head machine or a wider machine. So I used that for a job and sold it. And I then decided I need to find something that worked better. So I decided the 530 was brilliant, but if it had more grunt and a bit more control, that would be the ultimate. So that's when I jumped on the phone again to you guys and said, right, I've looked into it. We can get an 11 kilowatt motor in a reduced frame. So it's the same size as a big block motor. Same size shaft and things, so it should fit on technically. The cabinet's the same as an 820 or a 680, so the drive should all fit in. What do you guys reckon? Do you reckon we're going to blow it apart or what? And Hayden said, let's give it a crack. We can always wind it back and limit it with amps or whatever if we need to. And so then the Mega Block was born. And haven't looked back ever since then. So been lots of changes and chops and changes along the way.
Absolutely. I wanted to ask a bit of a question about just with all that changes and certainly I suppose going 3-phase and more powerful machines and things like that. We could spend all day answering this question, but just in general, I guess, big change in cooling choice or was it just a bit of tweaking along the way or was it a real sort of change of mindset?
It's a bit of tweaking along the way. I've certainly found with the real smaller, lighter weight machines, you need to sacrifice some diamond life to try to get some form of production. And at the end of the day, you're not spending the money on the machinery and the generators and the vehicles and the everything else. So you got to spend some money somewhere to try to get productive. Absolutely, you needed to go to like the softest you could find, smaller diamond segments, trying to increase point pressure, not just tooling choice as well, very much systems. So you could find, even with the softest tooling, you could still close it up very easily, especially with something like a 450 where you can't adjust speeds or change direction. So then things like, you know, if you're applying water, how much water, whether you let it drop in, whether you top it up and make it a little bit more wet and grind almost sort of semi-wet to dry, whether you use grout fluid, sands, things like that. Once you start to get more control on the machine, you can adjust things on your dials a bit more than adjusting everything else in front of the machine. So that certainly made a massive difference. I still tend to run more on the softer side of tooling to keep production, even with the Mega Block now, and that's got an 11 kilowatt main motor and stuff, and I can load it up more, but you get addicted to production, and sometimes you sort of say, I'd rather spend a few $100 extra on this job and make a couple of grand more today than save a little bit of diamonds and know that my production's going to go dramatically down because I just don't have so much weight to really drive that in and wear the metal and keep things going. So as I've gone into the 3-phase and stuff and I've got more control, I have tweaked slightly and increased some of the metal bonds here and there, and I find myself still at times wearing out diamonds a bit prematurely where I sort of like, I could have thrown some mediums on then and I've just blitzed these ones in a hurry, but at the end of the day, I've still been making good money and thought, you know, next time I'll try a slightly harder bond and see where I go from there. But it's still certainly have to use those some of those systems in place as well with grouts and things. Yeah.
That's great. Michael, thanks for that. So what you're trying to say, by just for shortening all it down, is buy a lot more tooling. Love it. Thanks,
pretty
Michael.
much, yeah.
No, but it's interesting, mate.
Lots of sound, cut sick, all that. Yeah, that's your friend, yeah.
No, it's great. Thanks, mate. Cheers for that. It's good to get that bit of background, so that's great.
Yeah, no worries.
Hey, Michael, I had a question for you. I believe that you're the only person in the world to hold the keys at the same time to a big block 530 and also a mega block 530. So that's being first in the world. I wanted to know, what's the percentage or productivity increase that you see the mega block versus the big block?
It's hard to say. The big block I did manage to, that's still a really good productive machine and that's great bang for buck. So if you're upgrading a machine, the cost difference from a big block to a mega block is fairly considerable. The big block is still great value, and I've done big meters with that very quickly. I remember I did 180 square meters of mechanical heavy exposure, mechanical polish to a mid-gloss in about 5 days. So it's still capable of punching out some good meters. The mega block will cut harder, faster, and it won't scream its nut off as much when you're pushing it through grout and making it work. And as I said, because I do tend to go for softer diamonds and I grout on 60s because I want the production and I want scratch removal and I want everything to work, which these are things that I learned from the single phase stuff. I had to do it then or I never would have removed the 30 grit scratch, and that stuck. So I now grout the 60s all the time. Your production's way faster than grinding dry. You start the filling process, all those things. I push a machine as fast as I possibly can. So every job, it purely depends on what's happening behind the machine as to how fast I'll push it. And if everything's looking good and I'm seeing exactly what I want to see out the back of the machine, I try pushing a bit faster. And so that's how I often get through jobs as quick as I do with the smaller machines, because it's purely about what's happening behind the machine. But when you're pushing hard through grout and things on 60s, cutting hard with soft bonds and that, you're pushing the limits of the machine often at times as well, and they start screaming. And I never really thought about it till I got the mega block. I always thought, well, the big block could always do everything that I needed it to do, and it was fine. And the mega block needed a few tweaks when I first got it because it was the first one. And I kept thinking, I'm using the same diamonds as the big block. Why are certain things struggling here? It wasn't until I got that sorted and then went back and used the big block one day and was driving hard through grout and stuff. And I listened to the motor a bit more than I usually did and realised, no, that is actually screaming off its nana. I wonder what the amps are doing, because it hasn't shut down yet and it hadn't before. So I might as well check it and see what it's doing. And it was bouncing off about 17, 18 amps when it should have been, just under 15 is really its max. And I could hear the pitch of the motor, and that's when I knew, okay, well, I am pushing this thing harder than I probably should at times, probably fairly often. Whereas the Mega Block at the same time is just cruising. It's just hammering through and cruising. It's doing the first cut harder. Once you're into polishing and everything else, it's flying. So, yeah, as far as product comparisons, look, absolutely, if you've got the money and you want to stay in a small machine and you want the best bang for buck and the most production you're going to get out of any machine of that sort of size, the Mega Block is just, it's the duck's nuts. But bang for buck, the big block it's pretty hard to pass too. Yeah. If that answers the question. It's a long way around there, but I'll get back to you.
Now I'm fully convinced though.
Safe to say you're right.
Well, Michael, I think you pretty much answered the question I was going to ask. But what's your ultimate setup going to be? Now, you've kind of explained the difference between your big block and your Mega Block. What would you go with, like tooling, machinery-wise?
Machinery-wise, for me, again, I'm stuck with the smaller machines, and the reason I've done that is because most of my slabs are like this that I get on, massive, edge roll, wavy as, it's nothing to throw I walk into a slab and I don't put a straight edge on it unless I walk into the slab and go, Jesus, that's pretty rough, and then I go and get the straight edge out to see just how rough it is. And I've found having the narrower width machines, I tend to be able to ride some of those more and still get consistent shine, more refined scratch pattern, not leaving gouges, density removal, all the things you struggle with when the floor's out of whack. I tend to be able to fudge more with a smaller width machine. So that's fitted my market better because most people don't want to pay me to flatten the floor first to get it within spec to make it polishable. I don't want to do that for nothing. Most people in my market don't care about floor flatness as such, as long as the results are as they should be. So, and access is another major one. I can often end up, in the middle of nowhere with no reception, in the middle of a bush where there's no neighbours for kilometres nearly, on my own, no one on site, no one probably coming back for a week or two, and there I am, full of 66 kilos wrestling this machine. I sort of want to do it safely and be able to do it, because people are always there to help you get a machine in, but they're usually not around when you want to get out of site. And I don't want to be stuck there for 3 days longer than I need to be. So having that, not relying on other people was a big one. So the small machines fit the bill. The 530 Mega Block is it. That's my ultimate. Softer bond tooling. I run a Macanex 23 kVA generator. I've got it was a custom made, like a motorbike trailer with a pop top. It's all fully enclosed in that. So I can have a generator in there, a grinder, vacuum, separators, all my chemicals, my resins, everything in a 4-wheel drive, because half the driveways I go to are like a non-maintained fire trail, and I can get in and out of any site just pulling one trailer. It's easy and it works. So to me, that's my ultimate setup. I've got it. I sort of designed it and built it with the help of you guys. The only thing I think I probably do next, which I spoke to Josh about briefly, is the big block is probably going to turn into a Mega Block, even though it's a spare machine and it just sits there most of the time, because I can, and because I don't like only having one when I'm in the middle of nowhere. I always like to have two and a spare. I think the big block is going to become a Mega Block at some stage as well. So, but otherwise, that's the machine for me.
Awesome, thanks for that. Sounds great.
I'm hearing that response and my heart just sunk a little bit there, Michael, because I've really been loving this conversation, and it's been fascinating. I feel like I'm really nerding out here on grinding school and hearing your process of discovery through all these out-of-the-box small solutions. And, clearly you started out there with the Cub. You're out there on Instagram these days with hashtag, I think it's 530beast. So you started out with the Cub, you found the grizzly bear, and because it's not far away. I just love the story of this progress from standard solutions to looking for something customized. And I guess that's why we love working with you so much too, because you challenge us, you challenge our workshop, you challenge us from an R&D point of view, and it's really great working with people that actually want to sort of think out of the box and take that next step and challenge and push the boundaries a little bit. So I guess my question is how much longer till you got another itch to scratch, and what do you think that's going to be? Because we're looking forward to the next iteration.
I don't. Well, actually, no. I won't lie. The only other thing that I would think would complete my setup, I suppose, would be a decent single phase. And when I say that, something that, if it's feasible, like 3 kilowatt, same direction rotation, I don't know, something that could be broken down more to get up and down stairs, things like that. I reckon there'd be a good spot for a decent machine out there that might tick the boxes a bit more. But that would be about my only thing, custom making a single phase machine that worked better. But again, we're limited with what we got. So
I almost had my money on radio control 530 mega block.
Well, actually, it's funny. A lot of guys always talk to me about RC, and after having the RX6, and again, as I mentioned earlier, the slabs that I work on being wavy, I've found that so often just cutting laps, and I used to always do that with a 530. I'd cut in the ends. It has got a longer handle for the width of the head, so that meant that each end of the room might have to be about 5 runs to actually cut in the end. So I could actually have a turning circle and cut laps, but I used to always run it that way, and I just found that, yeah, when the slabs are a bit like this, and that's what you're working with, and that's where it's at and what people are paying for, that often the run forwards in a pass and sway backwards on the overlap work better and enabled me to refine some scratch patterns and flatten the floor a bit more, not get gouges, do all sorts of things, feather out lows and things as I went and stuff without doing extra work. And the RC didn't really allow for that. I love my push machine, and I don't think I could ever go to an RC. The only reason I wanted an RC in the first place actually was to be able to get in and out of sight easier. And
I was going to say side access, yeah.
And I did that with the RX6 too, and I also discovered that often you had to push it through some of the processes and drive it that way anyway to fix up gouges and things that it left and stuff like that. Like I said, the chassis weight on it was awful. That was the most horrible machine to wrestle. I got to the end of a job, the first job that I did with it, and went, I could have done this just as fast with a 530. I wouldn't have been wrestling the machine as much. It would have been easier and more pleasurable to work with. And I sort of went, I don't think I need this in my life. I want to make things easier, and I found the push machine was much easier. So yeah, I'm happy with it. Just wrestling it all day long. Yeah.
I will ask you if you prepared your 2 truths and 1 lie.
I did, and I'll just ramble them off, and you can decide which is what. I once bought a PG 680 and used it to grind 1 concrete step and sold it. I worked out of a dual cab only with no trailer with a canopy on the back, and that would fit a grinder, vacuum, all chemicals, all diamonds, everything you could possibly need to do any size job you'd take on as a mechanical polish. No trailer, no anything, just a dual cab. And the last one would be that I really miss Melbourne and the weather there, and working with some face grinders. And I really want to get on again and move back to Melbourne.
That's a lie. That's a lie.
I thought you might pick that one, yeah.
I should be more specific. When you tell the 2 truths and 1 lie, it's probably good to mix them up.
I know. Well, I was going to, but I thought it was going to put the real obvious one far too much into the mix there. So, yeah, wanted to keep you guessing a bit.
No, it's a very good one, guys. If everyone's got their questions through, and Michael, it's been fantastic having you with us. It's usually we get towards the end of the video, Matt, and being a Friday afternoon, we tend to all go our separate ways and find ourselves a cold beverage.
Yes, that seems like a bit of a tradition, getting into the drink straight after, so why not?
That's right. But no, it's been fantastic, mate, and great to learn a bit about yourself and your journey as well. So thanks very much again for joining us. Any questions or comments, feel free to do so below. But yeah, thanks again.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Michael.
Thanks, Michael.
Michael Branagan.
Cheers, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Meeting. That's the one. That's all the credit we have left.
Let's do it. Let's go.
Let's put more money into this thing.